Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Equitas Insights. Today we have Chris from ThriveMap. Thanks, Chris, for taking time to be with us. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, no, pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Today we're discussing about reducing attrition and managing candidate expectations with realistic job assessments. Very interesting topic. But before we dive into this, for those people who don't know what you do, could you give a brief overview about what is ThriveMap and what you guys currently do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Chris. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ThriveMap. We create what we call realistic job assessments. And we do that primarily for high volume or frontline hiring. What they are is a new type of assessment that takes candidates through a digital day in the life of the job. So it means that candidates are assessed for job suitability, but importantly, it also means that candidates get to learn about the job and the culture ahead of joining the organization.
Awesome. That's a great overview. So let's dive into this topic of attrition. Like, what was the first time you found about the problem of new hire attrition and like recruitment or in hiring, basically? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story. So in 2017, we actually had a separate business to ThriveMap. ThriveMap as an idea hadn't been formulated yet. We had a marketplace business. It was very much driven around company culture and values and trying to find the right fit between individual and organization. And I remember standing in a car garage in Barcelona, Spain, and I was watching a job interview take place. And what happened there completely changed the course of our business and the subsequent direction of my life. So the candidate arrived on site for their interview. The manager printed off a piece of paper and grabbed a pencil and gave it to the candidate. And it was a personality test, basically, and asked the candidate to complete it. So the candidate sat there for half an hour writing their answers to this personality test. They then gave the completed form back to the manager. The manager asked the candidate to wait for 20 minutes whilst he typed it up into his computer and looked at the results. And then they had an interview. But after the interview, I asked the manager, look, what was that test? What was it all about? And the manager said, oh, it was a personality test. We have to do it. HR insists that we have to do it for all candidates. But I don't really see any value in it. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, the main reason people leave us is because the work is really hard. It's really challenging and candidates aren't always prepared for that. And the test isn't helping with that. So for us observing that and seeing that this was conducted at really high volume across the whole organization, not only was it really inefficient, but it also wasn't helping them with their main problem, which is about reducing the number of new hires that join and then figure out it's not the right environment for them. So we had a light bulb moment that assessments could be better. And that's what led us to develop ThriveMap.
Oh, amazing. So in terms of this idea that you had, right? So it's so inspiring how it started off. So what would you say is the most important part of the hiring process with regards, I mean, not the most important part, but like when it comes to these pre-hire assessments, do you think they're necessary for like the interview stage? Do you think that they are, instead of what happens after, like, let's say, for example, they encounter these assessments and then they get straight into the interview stage, but then they find out that maybe the work that they do in the job is not necessarily the same thing they experience in assessment. What happens then? Do you think that how realistic do you think them?
I think it's a big problem, and I think it's a problem we're directly trying to address, and our product is trying to address. So when we observed the assessment market, we saw kind of abstract assessments that were very detached from what people are actually doing. I think there's a real danger in that. And I think what we want to do in our whole philosophy and approach at ThriveMap is to try and get as close to what people actually do in the role and create these real life tasks and simulations and scenarios in an online environment so that every candidate can both be assessed fairly against the things that they're actually doing in the job, but also that they can experience it and they can quite clearly see how that might impact them and their ability to enjoy that role. And then if it's not for them, they can deselect themselves from the hiring process. And ultimately, your original question was, what are the kind of big things in the hiring process? What should recruiters and hiring managers really kind of watch out for? And it is very much our belief that assessment is a two-way process. And I think for a long time, the power imbalance has been more on the company side, not really on the candidate side of things. And it's not been very transparent in terms of here's what you're actually doing. It's been opaque. We're getting candidates to play games or complete personality tests. the reality is, be really transparent. This is what the job's about. Here are some things you'll be doing, and have your hiring process kind of match that as closely as possible.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, transparency is key, right, in the hiring process. I mean, a candidate wants to know a lot about what they're going to be doing, because I mean, at the end of the day, they do get that job offer, that's going to start into the job. So basically, I do understand what you're saying about transparency. And I think that's so key in the hiring process. So long you do it from all the way from the start, from the very beginning, when it comes from employer branding, all the way to the end when it comes to onboarding. I think that's very, very key especially for a candidate who's trying to figure out they're on their career journey, and they need that sense of like understanding what the realistic expectation is for that job. So yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I'll just add to that as well. I think our whole employer branding efforts as an industry, I think, have been focused on trying to communicate why our business is better than other businesses. And I think what it has created is just a lot of similarity. I think candidates are really struggling to differentiate between organizations, between different work cultures. My recommendation to organizations is just figure out what makes you different and really focus on that, rather than trying to out better everyone else, because you end up with the same kind of platitudes that everyone looks at and rolls their eyes. So yeah, I think when we design our assessments, we're always trying to understand, well, what is unique, what's kind of uniquely different about this particular work environment and role, and tell that story. And the truth is, every job is different. Every organization is structured differently, has different ways of working and cultures. So it's a much more authentic and transparent way to hire.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I even love the fact that you said about telling a story, because like, as you said, every company is different. Every company has a different story. So it's important to candidates actually want to read about a company and understand what they're about. So yeah, telling a story is a beautiful way to capture their attention. So yeah, awesome. Okay, so what is important when managing candidate expectations in hiring? What's the main thing that's important there?
Yeah, so we didn't think this was as big a deal. We obviously were in this garage in Barcelona, and we'd spoken to this hiring manager, and we'd spoken to a number of different managers in the same organization or within the subset of the same organization. And we kind of had this recurring thing come up around this expectation. Candidates expect a job to be a certain way, but actually when they turn up on the job, it's different. So what we did in 2018, kind of about 6 months later, is we conducted some research with OnePoll. So it's like a YouGov type poll, and we surveyed 2,000 people in the UK about their experiences around the hiring process. And we surveyed lots of different things. We wanted to know about how people felt about assessments, how people felt about hiring processes. But this question that really stood out, the data that really stood out to us, was that 1 in 2 people have left a job because the reality of the job is different from how they expected it to be. And a further third of people had left the company because the culture was different how they expected it to be. So we now have data to back up our kind of observations in practice to say, well, okay, if this is such a big reason new hires leave, then why isn't this being addressed in any of the solutions in the market today? So that's why we believe it's so important to manage those expectations. And yes, you can do that through making sure that your managers are saying the right things, making sure your employer branding efforts are authentic and real. But we kind of observed as well that candidates don't always listen to that when they're at interview. They're already there. They're just desperate to get the job offer. So the earlier you can bring that in, and if you can do it through an assessment, which enables them to easily opt out, it means you're just going to save a lot of time and effort in progressing candidates that aren't actually motivated to want to do the job and stay in the role.
That's so interesting. I love that. So say for an example, I mean, obviously candidate expectations are always like increasing and changing. It's very dynamic, especially with the pandemic, and like things have just changed a lot. And like we haven't really gotten back to our normal, right? So we're still in the new normal. But what I think is that regardless of candidates, like how often should different companies or hiring managers be aware of like these different expectations? Should they be having more like as you mentioned with the survey, should they be doing more stuff like that, more research? Should they be even asking candidates what it is they want? Would that be an interesting route to go down?
Yeah, I mean definitely if organizations have an attrition problem, particularly of hires in the first kind of 90 days or so, I think it's really important to do those exit interviews and ask, what is the reason for leaving? You won't always get the truth, but the companies that we speak to tend to be companies that are hiring in high volume, a lot of frontline roles, and they're all kind of saying, look, it's a very interesting market at the moment where candidates have a lot of choice. So if anything's not exactly what they expected it to be, or exactly perfect in their world, they'll go, well, I can just go and move to another company. It's so easy to get a job, to find jobs with job search engines, to apply in one click, to get an interview, that candidates aren't really afraid of doing that anymore. So if we can close that expectation gap and make sure candidates fully understand what's expected of them ahead of joining, it kind of reduces the chances that those candidates are going to go look elsewhere. And I think companies are certainly sometimes to blame in terms of their communication is not being authentic, but obviously the market dynamics at the moment is it's incredibly competitive to keep talent.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think like each company has their own ways and methods of doing this and helping to, making sure that they come across as authentic as possible. But yeah, still some companies are still struggling with this at the moment. So it's interesting advice you gave. So that's great. Great. Okay, so what I want to really find out is that why is this personally important to you? Like, what got you started on this mission with reducing bias and with managing candidate expectations and hiring, your whole journey? Like, what really inspired you for this?
Well, so for 10 years prior to this, I was actually in recruitment myself. So I very much worked in a culture where the incentive was based around placing as many people into a job as possible. And in-house recruitment, the incentives aren't quite the same as agency recruitment, but there is still a lot of focus on metrics and numbers and fill rates and things like that. Now, what I'm not saying is that recruiters are deliberately trying to mislead candidates, but over highlighting the good points and maybe downplaying points about their organization. Yeah, I think that happens quite consistently across a lot of organizations. So what we're trying to do here is standardize it so that every candidate goes through the same process. They have a real transparency as to what the role involves. There's no difference between how it's been communicated to them from hiring managers or recruiters, or certainly at least the assessment blanket covers a lot of that kind of expectation gap that could occur. And I think, for me personally, having been a recruiter, I've seen the impact it kind of makes in someone's life when they change jobs, and when they're in a job that they absolutely love, an environment they're going to thrive in. The impact it makes on that person's life is absolutely huge. But similarly, the impact you can make on someone's life if you're recommending a job that they're not quite right for, or you're providing them with bad information, or opaque information on what an organization is really like, that can have a huge negative impact on people as well. And for me, that was something I've obviously seen and witnessed firsthand, and that's why I when we came to develop this business, it was all about, well, look, if we're going to do assessments, let's do them differently. Let's not be abstract. Let's be really transparent, and let's push companies to tell a real story. And that's what matters to me.
Amazing. That is so inspirational, I just have to say.